I'm Rebecca Valcarzel. Let's talk about Home Burial, a poem by Robert Frost. He's an American poet from the 20th century, and you may know a lot of his poems from reading them in school, and this is one that is often assigned, and it's very sad. It's about a man and a wife who have lost a child, and it looks like maybe their only child has died. And the wife is grieving. Her grief is just bottomless, and she's expressing it. And the husband is grieving too, but in a different way, and in a way that the wife does not understand. And on his side, the husband doesn't really understand her way of grieving either. And so they're both at cross purposes. They're both misunderstanding each other. They can't be there for each other in a time of such sorrow. You would think they could come together, help each other, but they're not able to. They're not communicating. They don't understand each other's way of coping with this loss. So let's take a look at the text. It's very conversational. In fact, this is written almost as if it's a scene meant to be performed as a play. The narrator tells us, he saw her from the bottom of the stairs before she saw him. So picture in your mind a staircase. The husband's at the bottom of the stairs. The wife is at the top of the stairs. She was starting down, looking back over her shoulder at some fear. She took a doubtful step and then undid it to raise herself and look again. So here the wife is looking at something. She's thinking of going down the stairs, but she pulls back. And this is exactly her approach to life, actually, now that the child has died. She makes a motion to move forward with her life, but she can't. She can't go on and leave the child in the past. She retreats. And I think this is a symbolic move, but it's also just a literal move that she's starting down the stairs and then she decides not to go down the stairs because there's something out the window at the top of the stairs that she's looking at. He spoke, advancing toward her. What is it you see from up there always? For I want to know. She turned and sank upon her skirts at that, and her face changed from terrified to dull. He said, to gain time, what is it you see? Mounting until she cowered under him. I will find out now. You must tell me, dear. She, in her place, refused him any help. With the least stiffening of her neck and silence, she let him look, sure that he wouldn't see, blind creature. And a while he didn't see. But at last he murmured, oh, and again, oh. All right, so in this moment, she's been looking out the window. He walks up the stairs. He mounts up the stairs and insists that she tell him, what are you looking at? What is it that you see out there? And she thinks, he's not going to realize what it is. I'm just going to be quiet. He's such a blind creature. He will not even be able to tell. And she's really retreated. She's terrified at first. He's making this sudden move up the stairs right up to her. And she's actually almost under him, it says. She cowered under him. So he tries to force her to tell him, what is she thinking about? What is she seeing? And she thinks he won't figure it out, but he does figure it out. She let him look. So now he looks where she was looking and realizes, oh, now I know what you're looking at. And here's what she says. What is it? What? She said. Just that I see. You don't, she challenged. Tell me what it is. The wonder is I didn't see it at once. I never noticed it from here before. I must be wanted to it. That's the reason. The little graveyard where my people are. So small the window frames the whole of it. Not so much larger than a bedroom, is it? I'm going to interrupt him for just a second. So he's talking about the view from the window. He can see the graveyard. And this is a place where they've buried all their family members. So this is a farm, or a large tract of land where there's room for a house, and then probably fields or orchards, and an area where there's livestock probably, and a barn and such. So this area is the place where his probably parents are buried, grandparents are buried. This would be his family home, family farm. And he realizes it looks pretty small from here. It looks like a bedroom, with people sleeping. It doesn't bother him. That view, it's something he's grown up with. This is his home. He's lived here all his life. But when he is at the top of the stairs looking out the window, he realizes, oh yeah, it can be seen from right here. And as long as he has lived here, he hasn't noticed that exact view. She has, though, because she is so connected still to the dead child. So she's thinking, oh, he will not be able to tell what I'm looking at. But he does figure it out. And he says, not so much larger than a bedroom, is it? There are 3 stones of slate and 1 of marble, broad-shouldered little slabs there in the sunlight on the side hill. We haven't to mind those, but I understand. It is not the stones, but the child's mound. Don't, she cried. Okay, so as soon as he mentions the mound, the child has been buried recently enough that there's a mound of dirt where the child's been buried. And she can't even talk about it. She doesn't want to hear about it. Don't even mention it. Don't, she cried. She withdrew, shrinking from beneath his arm that rested on the banister, and slid downstairs and turned on him with such a daunting look. He said twice over before he knew himself, "Can't a man speak of his own child he's lost?" All right, so physically what happened here is that she was kind of under him. He was very close to her. His arm was on the railing, the banister, the edge of the stairs, and she kind of ducks underneath his arm to get down the stairs. So now again, they're separated by the stairs. He's at the top of the stairs, she's at the bottom, and he says, "Can't I talk about the child that I've lost?" And she says, "Not you. Oh, where's my hat? Oh, I don't need it. I must get out of here. I must get air. I don't rightly know whether any man can." Okay, so this is the wife getting ready to leave. She can't stand to be here, and she needs her hat because you don't go outside without your hat, partly for sun protection, but also for fashion and just what's expected of a woman. You always have your hat in this time period. So but then she's thinking, oh, I don't even need my hat. Never mind. I'm just going to go. I must get air. So she's just suffocating with the grief and being in the presence of a man she thinks doesn't understand the importance of the child or her grief, or who doesn't grieve himself, or at least not visibly. And she's upset. And she even says, "I don't know rightly whether any man can speak of the child he's lost." So she thinks that he can't really speak to this, that he doesn't have a right to speak. Her grief is more keen than his. And that may not be very fair on her part, but they both are being unfair in different ways. So he says, "Amy, don't go to someone else this time. Listen to me. I won't come down the stairs." He sat and fixed his chin between his fists. "There's something I should like to ask you, dear." "You don't know how to ask it." "Help me then." Her fingers moved for the latch for all reply. Okay, so he's trying to get her to stay. She's ready to leave, and by the end of this little section, she's already turning the knob, like her finger is on the latch to open the door. But he says, "Don't go to someone else this time." So she's done this before, where she needs to go cry on the shoulder of a friend, or maybe her parents or something. And he says, "No, this time stay with me. Let's talk to each other." And he says, "I won't come down the stairs. So I'm not going to leap toward you like I just did a minute ago. I'll stay here, and I want to ask you something." And he even says, "Dear," trying to make it a little softer. But she says, "You know what? You don't know how to ask it. you don't know how to have the conversation you're trying to have with me right now. And he says, help me then. And she's like, she's starting to leave. And then he says, my words are nearly always an offense. I don't know how to speak of anything so as to please you. But I might be taught, I should suppose. I can't say I see how. A man must partly give up being a man with women folk. We could have some arrangement by which I'd bind myself to keep hands off anything special you're a mind to name. Though I don't like such things twixt those that love. Two that don't love can't live together without them, but two that do can't live together with them. She moved the latch a little. Okay, so he's talking right here about how he admits that he can't say everything right. He always offends her. I don't know how to please you, he's saying. And he's even saying, well, maybe I could be taught. But then he says, I don't really know how I could be taught, because a man has to be less of a man, partly give up being a man with women folk. So he's admitting that he doesn't quite know how to talk to her, especially about this. And he's saying, I feel like I'm having to give up some aspect of myself in order to be able to talk to a woman. Now, does this mean that men can't communicate in general? Or that women are just hard to talk to? Or that men feel intimidated by how women are so expressive and emotional? Or are all those stereotypes that she's actually, she's not wailing and getting hysterical, but she really is in grief, and she won't be patient with him or see that he's grieving too, but he doesn't really help her because he's not expressing how he feels about the dead child. He's focusing now on, I always have trouble communicating with you. And he says, I'm having to give up being a man to be able to talk to you, or to women folk in general, not just her. And then he says, well, we could have an arrangement where, like, we could agree that I won't ever talk about certain things, or I'll never go into certain territory, and we'll never have a conversation about this subject. But he said that doesn't really work with people who love each other. And people who don't love each other, sure, they have to have those kind of rules. But people that do love each other, they can't really have subjects that are off limits, because that's going to undermine the relationship, right? They're not going to be able to have a connection that way if they're saying, no, you can't ever talk about the child's death, which is what she's saying. Don't you talk about it. And he's saying, yeah, but we need to talk about it. But at the same time, he's not saying how he really feels about it. So this is a very tense situation, and it doesn't resolve. So then she says, she moves the latch a little, like she's going to keep going out the door, and he says, don't go. Don't carry it to someone else this time. Tell me if it's about it, if it's something human. Let me into your grief. I'm not so much unlike other folks as your standing there apart would make me out. Give me a chance. I do think, though, you overdo it a little. What was it brought you up to think it the thing to take your mother loss of a first child so inconsolably in the face of love? You'd think his memory might be satisfied. There you go, sneering now. Okay, so she interrupts him. So he does pretty well for a little while, like saying, let me into your grief, give me a chance. I'm a human being too. You standing over there, it makes me seem to be inhuman. But I'm not. I'm human. But then he goes toward insulting her a little bit, saying, I do think, though, you overdo it a little. So he's acting as if her grief is, too big for the situation. Like, you're just too sad over losing your first child. I don't know what brought you up to make you think that should just be the end of the world. Well, for most people, losing a child, a first child, an only child, would be pretty upsetting and maybe feel almost like the end of the world. But he doesn't acknowledge that her grief is proportional to her loss. And that's why she says, well, now you're sneering at me. Now you're making fun of me. You're not taking me seriously. And he says, I'm not. You make me angry. I'll come down to you. God, what a woman. And it's come to this. A man can't speak of his own child that's dead. Okay, so now he's angry. You can't, because you don't know how to speak. If you had any feelings, you that dug with your own hand, how could you, his little grave? I saw you, from that very window there, making the gravel leap and leap in air, leap up like that, and land so lightly, and roll back down the mound beside the hole. I thought, who is that man? I didn't know you. And I crept down the stairs and up the stairs to look again, and still your spade kept lifting. Then you came in. I heard your rumbling voice out in the kitchen, and I don't know why, but I went near to see with my own eyes. You could sit there, with the stains on your shoes of the fresh earth from your own baby's grave, and talk about your everyday concerns. You had stood the spade up against the wall, outside there in the entry, for I saw it. I shall laugh the worst laugh I ever laughed. I'm cursed, God, if I don't believe I'm cursed. So that's his reaction to this story that she tells, that this memory she has. She says, there you were, digging his grave. How could you even do it? And of course he's thinking, yeah, I had to do that very hard thing, dig his grave, and I'm not getting any credit for it. And that's why he says, I'm going to laugh. It's not a laugh of thinking that she's crazy, really. It's a laugh of, I can't believe you think that I wasn't grieving when I was doing that digging. I can't believe I'm being blamed for digging a grave with my own hands when we could have hired someone to do it, but I did it myself for my own child. But he's not going to get any credit for that from her because she doesn't understand what he was going through at that time. And he didn't tell her what he was going through either. So he doesn't correct her. Right here he could have corrected her, but she doesn't understand from what he says, I shall laugh the worst laugh I've ever laughed. That does not tell her, I was crying inside as I was digging that grave, or I hated to dig that grave, or digging that grave is the only thing I knew to do. I'm a farmer, I work, I labor, the cycles of life do go on, and this is part of my job, is to dig this grave, even though it's hard. But he doesn't say any of that, and she doesn't understand it. And so she says, I can repeat the very words you were saying. And so she quotes him, 3 foggy mornings and 1 rainy day will rot the best birch fence a man can build. Think of it, talk like that at such a time. What had how long it takes to a birch to rot to do with what was in the darkened parlor, which is the body of the child. You couldn't care. All right, so she's thinking, you couldn't possibly have a heart or care anything about your child if you would talk like that. But let's examine what it is he said. He said 3 foggy mornings and 1 rainy day will rot the best birch fence a man can build. So building a fence is something that a man might indeed talk about who does these sorts of things on his farm. And he's saying you can build a great fence out of birch wood and it'll rot if you get 3 foggy mornings and 1 rainy day. This is about the fact that you can't go through life and not lose things. You try to build something and it gets ruined. Nature takes down what you build up. He's talking about the dead child, but he's talking around it. He's not talking directly about it. And so she misinterprets him. He's talking about fences. He's actually talking about death, but she thinks, how can you be talking about fences at a time like this? What have fences to do with death? And with the baby, or the little, probably little toddler lying there in the parlor, which is like kind of like a living room where they would have laid out the dead body until the grave was ready. You couldn't care, is what she says. The nearest friends can go with anyone to death come so far short they might as well not try to go at all. She's talking about how much comfort can anyone else give you? Not much, because they can't really go all the way with you to the loss. They're just supporting you, but they can't get near enough, she says. No, from the time when one is sick to death, one is alone, and he dies more alone. Friends make pretense of following to the grave, but before one is in it, their minds are turned and making the best of their way back to life, and living people, and things they understand. But the world's evil. I won't have grief so. If I can change it, oh, I won't. Okay, so she's resisting the healing process, getting over the death. Friends go on with life. They make the best of it. They make their way back to life and living things and things they understand. And the dead are forgotten, is what she's saying. But of course, it's healthy to go on, to come to terms with death and losing people, and yet it's so hard. And she thinks, this is not what grief is supposed to be like. I won't have it so, meaning I don't want grief to be like this. If I can change it, oh, I will. Of course, she can't really change it, and she is not accepting the death. And he is, but it doesn't mean he's not hurting. And then friends are, but maybe she feels like no one feels the death like I do. I can't get over it. Like getting over it would mean that I don't love that child. Forgetting that child is some kind of insult to the child, as if I don't care or never loved him. And we all go through these kinds of thoughts when we lose a loved one or even a pet. We feel like, oh, but I've got to remember this person and be crying forever now, every day. And yet we can't really do that. So now the husband, instead of saying, yes, I feel your pain, he says, there, you have said it all and you feel better. You won't go now. You're crying. Close the door. The heart's gone out of it. Why keep it up? Amy, there's someone coming down the road. Okay, so he's belittling her grief. She's just poured out this thing to him, how she feels about healing. And he says, okay, sweetie, you're all done crying now. That's great. And it's patronizing. And so he was making a real effort before, but now he's patronizing, and she doesn't like it. And of course, it gets worse when he says, Amy, there's someone coming. He worries about what people will think. The town might talk about our marriage or about you. If you are always running out of the house to cry on other people's shoulders, or you're always leaving me, and he's probably embarrassed, that they're not working this out. The marriage really is in danger. It's struggling. And losing a child is a lot of marriages don't survive that kind of a thing. So this is her response. You think the talk is all. I must go somewhere out of this house. How can I make you? If you do, she was opening the door wider. Where do you mean to go? First tell me that. I'll follow and bring you back by force. I will. And that's the end. So she's accusatory. All you care about is the talk, the gossip of town, what other people think. I'm leaving. And she says, I've got to go. She doesn't say I'm leaving you, like the marriage is over, but she's saying I'm leaving right now, and I need to get out of this house. How can I make you? And she would probably finish that sentence, if she would finish it, with something like, how can I make you understand? How can I make you realize how in grief I am, or how little I care about what other people think right now? And he's threatening now. If you do, he'd like to force her to stay, to feel better, which you can't really force anybody to heal quickly, right? But he wants to, and he also wants to prevent her from going. He realizes that he really can't, because she's opening the door wider. Where do you mean to go? Meaning, where are you intending? Where are you planning to go? At least tell me. First tell me where you're going. I'll follow you. I'll bring you back by force, I will. And that's the end. It may feel like this is an unfinished scene, but it really is pretty finished, because presumably she goes out the door and they're just left with this separation and this miscommunication. And there is no resolution. There's no happy ending. There's not even a sad ending, really. There's this rupture in their marriage and between the two of them. And it might be worth mentioning that losing a child in this time period was much more common. Something like cholera could kill a child. That's how Robert Frost lost his first child at age 3. So Robert Frost has actually been through this experience. And so had many couples and families been through the experience of losing a child, or more than one child. Without penicillin, antibiotics, an infection or an injury would take a child pretty commonly. So this wasn't an unusual conversation that might have happened between men and women, or husbands and wives, parents across the country. It's a heartbreaking moment where that disconnect and misunderstanding and miscommunication is just even more tragic, because the loss of the child is already tragic, but now they're going to lose each other too, very likely. And if not to an actual divorce, then to an emotional distancing and a hardening of the heart, because they can't come together on this grieving. Well, there it is, Home Burial by Robert Frost. As tragic as it is, I hope that you feel like you have a good understanding of the poem. It's remarkable to me for its conversational quality, the sense that it's a little piece of drama. And so, in a weird way, I actually enjoy it. I hope you did too. Hope you'll join me for another video sometime.